Stern. You're listening to My Alien Life.
So those kind of speeds exist in our galaxy, and this object came from outside of our solar system. Having a large relative velocity, remember, objects in our solar in the galaxy are moving with relative velocities on average of between 200 and 300 kilometers per second, which is much, much faster than any object in our solar system. So any random object that wasn't part of our solar system happened to be traveling in the direction of our solar system, it could easily traverse our solar system with a speed that's incredibly large.
It had been tested on lab mice, and it didn't kill them, and so I wasn't really that leery about it.
I can see that there's a fear on his face. And he took off, we took off. So something was wrong there, man. Something was wrong there, man. They cut into something that they didn't know. They didn't know what was wrong there, man. And there was some problems.
My Alien Life is recorded high atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is heard all over the world, and you can listen everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you'll find links to every episode, stories, photos, the My Alien Life Legends page, and much more. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and consider becoming a patron while you're checking out all the content. I'm your host, Cameron Logan. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, one, zero, and liftoff.
Starting in 5, 4, 3. Starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're back. It's Thursday night. Thanks for joining us once again. This is My Alien Life. It's a podcast. And let me just preface the whole show with this. If you listened last week, and yeah, if you did, thank you very much. I want to reinforce that show sort of with this one. Kind of like you're reading a novel. And I want you to think you're reading like chapter 8. This one's chapter 9. And wouldn't even have to be chapter 9. But last week I talked about dreams I had as a young man. And, I was thinking, who cares? Who really cares about dreams? And I hope you didn't think that, but sometimes, people talk about their dreams, and often they put too much reality into the dreams, or they give the dreams a lot of weight, and often they're just dreams. And sometimes I do that too. It's a dream. People think it's a dream, and it's real. And it's really hard to document a dream. It's easy to write it down. Lots of people write down their dreams, but it's hard to write out the dream where you don't leave the listener or reader always thinking it's just a dream. And that's important. So we need to listen to this carefully because, yes, it's a dream. And a lot of times your mind is working overtime. But as you know, as we know, often it could easily be more than that because it definitely feels real. And sometimes it parallels our life. And sometimes it tells us the truth, helps us to look into the future, helps us to look into the past, gives us answers that we would have never expected. Dreams are that way. So FYI, I can't say I wasn't out there watching this activity that I talked about last week. Trucks, vehicles driving behind my house, blue light, these big depressions full of blue light in the ground that became a dome. Alien figures in this blue light, men with hard hats, big guys with featureless faces. And to me, it felt real. And I stand by the fact that evidence exists. I mean, there's the formations out there on the prairie. They're still there today. They're becoming less and less potential evidence all the time as that part of my childhood is eroding away just like these dreams do. Fortunately, I've written all that down. So for me, it's easy to remember because it's all part of the bigger story. The story of me. I want to talk about somebody else just briefly. I think of all the people in the world that inspired me the most, and indeed, the one person that I probably loved more than anyone in the world is my grandfather. Yeah, he died when he was 81, and if he didn't have cancer, he probably would have lived to 100 years old. So he was a really well-liked person in the community. He drove a bus. He was a school bus driver, and he was also the school custodian. And this is a rural Montana school out in the middle of nowhere. You know, no mall, no stores of any kind. A post office that had to be 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot. 8 cubic, or just this cube out on the prairie with a little roof that was, just enough to keep out the rain. But I was always attached to the man. He meant a great, great deal to me. And I totally hope I get to see him again. I can't imagine not. It makes me anxious just to think about because the not part. I would love it to be so. I would love to see him again. I miss him so much. But as a small child, before I went to school, it was just a thrill for him to show up, drive the bus into our yard. I had a couple more years before I would go to school, and I remember this vividly, and he'd give me a ride in the school bus. And honestly, I don't like to say this, but I do think I was his favorite. He had quite a few grandchildren and a few great-grandchildren. But, I was always there. That was one of the funnest, nicest places for me to be at his house with my grandparents. And those are some of the fondest memories that I have. There's a lot of really weird memories that I have, and scary memories that I have. So the fact that he would do anything for me was a big deal. So during this time when the dreams were taking place, there was a really couple of odd nights thrown in there, thrown into the mix that brought some validity to the whole dream slash reality scenario, kind of tipping it to the reality side, actually really tipping it to the reality side. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. It just amazes me that, there were so many things that happened to me, and it amazes people who are around me, and I hope it amazes you as well. But, that's one of the questions that I often have for people that I've interviewed in the past, why you? Why is all this stuff happening to you? So why is all this stuff happening to me? I never did feel that connection to people who had all these experiences because I always felt my experiences were different, and I don't know why. We have these people out there who are having these paranormal experiences, and they're so wild and so crazy, and really there's not two people out there alike. I mean, there's not two people who are having the same experiences at different ages, Some people might have a lot of extraterrestrial experiences with a few other paranormal experiences thrown in, and other people could be having the same or opposite with different variations. So one of the things that I feel is happening is, well, I feel that it clouds certain things that we've learned about that we've grown up with. So when we have these paranormal or extraterrestrial experiences, I believe that they cloud these indoctrines that we've been put through as children, whether it be church or other, and build some different questions in our brain. So that's why I want to talk about God for a minute. When you read the Bible, it's different than it's portrayed in church. I mean, there's fire and brimstone, there's whatever, but there's some harsh differences in what you hear in mainstream religion and what you read in the Bible. The Old Testament is fairly violent, and if you think that you're going to be inspired by every page or find a passage or something life-changing in every page, it might not happen that way. But keep in mind it is a book, and there's a big picture there. So people always wonder, sometime in their life, where did I come from? And religion, Christianity in particular, has an answer to that. And I believe it's true. I believe that we're creations of God. Now, having said that, I don't really want to go beyond that because I don't want to talk about, did we come from Adam and Eve? Where did we come from? But there's always that question, though, and people ask me, and we talk about this a lot. People that are into, especially extraterrestrial ideas and paradigms, we sit and we talk about what these things are and why is the universe so big, and where did we come from? Ultimately, where do we come from? Because we know that as humans, we have a beginning. We know as humans that we have an end. But as humans, we want to know what happened before the beginning of me, and what happens after the end of me. earth? So those are big questions. And I don't know the answer. Well, I can say that I know where I'm going when my body on this earth dies. That in itself got me to thinking about this show that I'm doing tonight. Here I am out on the prairie experiencing all these things that have nothing to do with the Bible. I mean, it's all these things that are being thrown at me are not reinforcing these chapters in the Bible or books in the Bible. And, it takes life, the sense of life, and it spins it in a way that there's no sense in it whatsoever. Because life is so different in reality. Different from what? That's a good question, because we're always comparing what we go through by other experiences that we literally know nothing about, but only have heard about. So that's why when I describe these different situations that I've been put in, I have a hard time getting the words out. It looks great on paper, but in my head, there's just so much more. There's just so much more. It's like, again, laying on your back at 2 a.m. and staring up at the sky and looking at that amazing universe and just realizing then how different each one of us are. So back to my grandfather. Whenever I got a chance to spend any time with him, especially alone, it was a big deal. Fishing, great times. There were other times hunting. I used to do a lot of hunting and fishing before I got older with him and with my father as well. So it's not that I've slowed down in older age. It's just because it's different without those guys, and they're both gone. So when I think about my grandfather and think about him and things we used to do, and when he would show up, every time he would show up, it was a big deal. And I always got to see him every Sunday. And we would go over to my grandparents' house, or they would come over to our house for dinner. So that was a big deal. But other times, special occasions, it was a bigger deal. I got to take a trip across the country with my grandparents, and got to be with him, and it was amazing. And so when he showed up, it was a big deal. And there was a night in my life when he showed up, and it was a really big deal. It was a game changer. It was a life changer. It was a dream-driven, enhanced experience that validated, I believe, all these dreams that I'd had in the past about these blue lights out on the prairie and what was actually going on out there. I still don't know what was actually going on out there, but I do know that and feel that it was real, because I later had another experience that kind of threw this whole thing together. So the other reason I wanted to talk about God, and particularly the Bible, is because light is mentioned so much in the Bible. Why is light mentioned so much in the Bible? Now, if I asked you how many times is light mentioned in the Bible, in my mind, I could think of 1,000, maybe more. According to what I've researched in the Bible, in the King James Version of the Bible, light is mentioned 272 times in 235 verses, which is still a lot. But so there is an importance to light. Obviously, God is bathed in unimaginable light, and we can't see God and live, which to me, that's incredible. But he's bathed in unimaginable light. And when we hear of these extraterrestrial experiences, we think, or this light that is associated with extraterrestrial experiences of certain kinds. To me, I wonder, why we're thinking aliens when obviously people 2,000 years ago in Egypt and elsewhere were seeing this light in the Middle East and thinking God, angels, whatever. So we're a bit different. We're a bit different now. And there is some documentation about, well, there's a lot of it actually, about light and demonology, and the fact that not the fact, but the opinion of some that these extraterrestrials that we're seeing are actually demons or are a form of evil. And I don't know the answer to that question or the answer to that. I would hope not, but obviously there are people, including myself, that have had some really bad experiences. So let me tie this together a bit. Yes, light is mentioned in the Bible. It's biblical. Seeing lights over the last 2,000 years have sort of, the narrative has kind of changed. Has the narrative changed, or have we changed as human beings, or has the experience changed? Or are they different experiences altogether? That's a lot to think about. So one night in my little house on the prairie as a child, I wasn't so much a child as I was a young man, there was some commotion. It was about midnight, and it's interesting that the little town that I grew up in had a fire department. I mean, I grew up on the outskirts of town, more on the prairie, but the fire department was a city fire department, and there was a town a few miles away that had a fire department, all volunteer, and wasn't a staffed fire department. And what they call the fire hall was usually just a garage big enough to hold a fire truck. And when I said fire truck, that it was a fire truck. The one in my town, particular town, it had to be from the 50s, and it was always in a state of disrepair. But every time it was needed, and during my lifetime in that small town, I probably saw it realistically being used maybe 6 times, which was always interesting. And the fire truck always made it to the fire, but it might not make it back to the garage that night. And it might sit there for a couple of days because it had to be worked on. And everybody joked about it, but every time I saw the fire truck, it was running and it was spraying water, and it was impressive for the little truck it was, and it did a job, and it was amazing. And it was remarkable to me as a child to see that, because I appreciated the fact that it was old and that it was falling apart, but it was still doing a job, and that in itself was sort of a surreal story. That seeing that, just it didn't make sense that this could do this job, and these 4 or 5, maybe 7 or 8 people who showed up as volunteers to operate this machine were able to do a great job. So good job, man. Good job, guys. So this particular night, again, it's dark, and I remember it being moonless, but that doesn't really have to be. That's just my memory. I remember it being very, very dark. And I was in my bedroom, and I was mostly asleep. And I heard my parents up walking around. I heard them talking a little louder than normal. And I heard the fire truck. First, I heard what usually would happen is the fire hall would have a siren that would be to announce that there was a fire, and everybody would congregate there that were volunteers, get the fire truck, go to the fire. So I heard the town siren. A lot of towns in Montana have one that goes off at noon. I don't know about other states, but little towns have a noon siren, and it's just a thing. And it could be just a Montana thing. I don't know. Let me know. Heard the siren, heard the fire truck go by, heard it rumble down the street, heard my parents, heard the door slam, heard my parents outside. They were in back of the house. We had small fires and things like that around town. Turned out to be no big deal. I didn't really feel like getting out of bed. I was tired. I've been watching TV for hours and finally just fell asleep. And then I heard my grandfather's voice. And that changed everything. So I felt that there was something wrong. I mean, to me, I had major anxiety right there, panic attack, jumped out of my bed, ran downstairs, and in the area where the stairs met the kitchen area, there was a window, and it was in the back of our house. So the window was open, and there was a screen in there. It's hot out. I do remember it being late fall, but it was hot. We didn't have any air conditioning in the house. So it wasn't unusual to have all the windows open. So the 2 windows were open, and they opened in, and there was a screen in there, and there wasn't a lot of room in that tiny area. If you were going to come upstairs from the basement, you had to duck under the window if it was open. And if you went into the laundry room, you had to duck under the window if it was open, because they didn't lay flat against the wall. There wasn't enough room. Poor planning. So I went up to the window, which was definitely chin height. And to anybody standing on the lawn below the window, it would be probably a foot over their heads. So we had a stool in the living room that if I ever wanted to look out the window, I mean, even when I was 16 years old, I'd have to stand on that because the window was particularly high. And the stool, I'm dating myself, and I'm hoping that you recognize what this is, but back in the day, people used to take and save, I guess they were tomato juice cans, and they were big cans. They were like maybe 12 to 14 inches high and maybe 5 to 6 inches in diameter. So they would take one of these cans and put it in the middle and then surround it with cans, and then somehow they would cut material fabric and put over it and put padding on the top, and these empty cans that basically had triangular holes punched in the top to empty them. They became a stool, a footstool. We called it a footstool. So my grandmother would make those. So anybody that I knew that knew my grandmother had one of these footstools, and it sort of had a flower-shaped pattern, the footprint of it, and then it had the padding on top. So it looked like a normal footstool, but it just had a little bit of an odd shape. So I grabbed this footstool, set it in front of the window. I'm hoping you remember this and can tell me what this footstool is called. But set it in front of the window, stood up there, and down below on the left, I could see my father. In the middle was my mom, and there's my grandfather. And I can see out in the country, and I can see out to where about the gate would have been in my dream that I had last week, that I talked about last week. And those are the gates that would let these, or keep me away from these trucks that were doing their business out on the prairie. And I could see the fire truck out there. And this is real. This is not a dream. What else I could see was probably 4 or 5 trucks out on the prairie, pickup trucks, and these are just the regular old pickup trucks from the 70s or the 60s or even the 50s maybe. I could see the headlights out there, and they were driving around. Once in a while, I could see a shadow of a person in front of it, but there was fires out there. And there had to have been, 12 to 15, maybe more, fires out on the prairie. And I'm like, wow, like the whole prairie's on fire. And these weren't big fires. There's grass out there. There's always been grass out there, but it's very short, very short. And in that particular area, there's cows that would graze out there. And I really don't know how many acres that would be, but I would say in about a 3-mile stretch of prairie that I could see from left to right that went out about 7 miles, there was always cows out there, and the grass was always short. There was different bigger ravines that collected more water and things like that with longer grass, but for the most part, the grass was like 3 or 4 inches. So there were small fires, and as I was watching, and I could hear my parents and my grandfather talking right below me. They're just a foot away. They don't realize I'm there. But I can hear people out there yelling, and I could see just real quickly, one of the closest little fires, little spot fire, there was people out there, and they had put it out. So these fires weren't. There was no danger of setting the whole prairie on fire and whatever. It was just odd that they had set these or that something had set these fires, and that's what my parents and my grandfather were talking about. Who had set these fires, and it was odd because it seemed like everything that was going on out there was in slow motion, and the fire truck kind of ambled its way out there, and I could see it driving out there, and I'm assuming that it didn't do much because these guys were putting these fires out, small fires out with shovels and whatever. And over to my right, there was a particularly big one. So I knew that something bigger and possibly some, out on this prairie, there was old houses that had fallen down and barns and whatever. So it wasn't featureless. People had lived out there in the past and weren't anymore, and also it was a great place to throw old junk and lumber and things that you didn't need in your yard at one point, the people that lived in town. So I'm sure it was a makeshift dump, probably in the 30s and 40s and the 20s even. And so there was stuff out there on the prairie. It wasn't just a flat open expanse. There was some junk out there and whatever, but I digress. My parents and my grandfather are talking about what started this fire. And looking over to the right, seeing this bigger blaze that was going out there, and obviously there was some structure of some kind, lumber involved. And my grandfather said, "What was that?" And my dad saw it as well. My mom didn't see it. I didn't see it. And I knew that my dad and grandfather knew what what they were talking about, because they had both seen something at the same time. And so it made me sort of scan the whole prairie and wonder, what they had seen. And my dad, who really, really had a hard time keeping words in. If there was something on his mind, he was going to say it. And he said it was a blue light. It was a blue light. So that made me, I could feel the hairs on my head tingle. I could feel the hair on my arms tingle. It was a blue light. So having these dreams and knowing, where this blue light emanated from, I looked a little bit over to the left where those depressions that I talked about in my last podcast were located, and I didn't see anything there. As a matter of fact, over really that way, that's not really where most of the fires were. They were mostly straight ahead and a little bit to the right. There was one or two maybe where these depressions were, but they weren't the most significant. And so the ones on the right-hand side kind of grabbed your attention. So it was a blue light was echoing in my mind, and I was just terrified. I mean, I was stone cold, and I was paralyzed. I could hardly move, and I'm standing there, and I kind of got my toes, curled on this footstool, and it's kind of bobbling around below my feet, and I can just feel this aching in my feet because, I'm scared, obviously, and I'm trying to balance, but I'm just hanging on with my feet, my toes, and my feet are cramping, and it's just a really, really strange situation. So at that point, everything just kind of became echoes, and I could hear them talking, and my mom said something about blue light, which captured my attention really quickly. She didn't see a blue light. She was asking about the blue light. And my dad said, I don't know. And so my mom asked my grandfather, and he said there was a blue light. And my mom said, where? And he said, straight ahead. And she said, oh, that's so-and-so's truck. And she mentioned a name, and I don't know what that meant. But she felt that it was somebody's vehicle out there making this blue light. And my grandfather said, quote, no, it came straight from the sky and straight to the ground. And I almost lost it. Why? Why was that so frightening to me? I have no idea. It was terribly frightening. He said it was right in the sky and went straight to the ground. And literally, it had to be 5 seconds later. I mean, they're talking, they're discussing this. And this blue light, just as he had described, over to the left, where these depressions were, came straight out of the sky. And it was like a blue lit rope. And it came right out of the sky, straight into the ground. There was no sound, there was no vibration, nothing. And when it was gone, I could see yellow fire there. And I was stunned, I was paralyzed, and I was going to cry. I could feel tears just running down my face, and I was going to scream. I mean, it was terrifying. My parents, my grandfather were stunned. They had nothing to say. They were just, and then my mom said, oh. And the way she said it, it was like terror in her voice, and that hurt. To hear my mom say oh, but the tremble and the fear in her voice just tore me apart. And I said, Grandpa, and I said it so quietly, but I said it so quietly, and I could barely get it out. And I heard him say, it's Cameron. So my mom said, Cameron, don't come outside. And afraid. She sounded so horribly afraid. And I told her, I said, I want to come outside. Can I come outside? My dad said, no, stay in the damn house, which was like typical of my dad. So I stood there stunned, in total fear. My toes are still gripping this ridiculous tomato juice can footstool. And just like it was supposed to happen, without warning, whatever was happening out there, the blue lights, lots of blue lights, in this whole 3 mile or so stretch. And maybe it was hard to say how far out on the prairie that these blue lights were, but maybe in the period of 10 minutes, there was probably 50. And just at random spots and at random times. Each one of them was a little brighter, dimmer than the other. They didn't look the same. They were totally vertical. There was no angles to them whatsoever. It didn't matter if you looked 2 miles to the right or a mile to the left. They were totally vertical from whatever angle that we were at. I mean, I think about that now, which makes me wonder why they were always totally vertical, but they were just totally vertical. And it wasn't like they came out of the sky from any given point. You could look at them and you could see the ones that were farther away. They could have started higher up in the sky than ones closer, or vice versa. But the length, the distance they were away from us was always different. And it would just be like you could barely, it was so quick, you couldn't notice them going from the sky to the ground unless you were looking right at it or happening to be looking right in that area at the same time. And you could see that it was basically a beam that shot from the sky down. But it was very quick. It was almost like it was just a solid bar of light if you just looked at it at the wrong time. And it was there maybe a second, maybe a second and a half, and it wasn't there very long. Again, there was no noise. It wasn't anything violent. They just came on. And as these little fires burned down in the prairie and caused more smoke, there was no wind that night, and the smoke rose. You could see the blue light. It just enhanced it a little bit because you couldn't see it as well. If it was a clear sky behind it and it was totally dark, you couldn't see it as well. It was definitely lit up blue, and it was definitely there, but like a laser, I guess, you could see these lights in the smoke just a little bit better. And they were wider, definitely, in the smoke. So that was amazing. I mean, if I think about that, and if I didn't live it, and I got to see this in a movie or something, to me it would be awesome. And I think about like now, like Travis Walton seeing this blue light and whatever, and other people who have had extraterrestrial encounters have noticed this blue light. To me, it's makes me wonder what the blueness is, you know. And then later on and during, before and after in these dreams, you know, seeing these blue lights and blue light coming out of the ground, you know, where I was growing up. So all these little fires are starting across the prairie. It's absolutely terrifying. It should be absolutely stunning and amazing if you didn't live in a world that wasn't used to something like this. It was terrifying. My grandfather was terrified, and there was more fires out there. Nothing major, but lots of little fires. And you know, if there was you know, a few less than a dozen before, now there was 50 or 60, maybe 100, I don't know. It's hard to determine. There was a lot of fires. So my dad said, I need to go out there now. beside herself, no, can't go out there. My dad's like, I need to help put out these fires. And I was thinking, they're going to go out on their own. I mean, I spent so much time out there. I knew what this ground was like and the grass cover. And to me, fire was the last thing on my mind. And my mom said, if you go out there, there's no way you're coming back. So that was frightening. I mean, to hear my mom say that there was a potential of my dad going away, and obviously death was going to be what kept him from coming back, that was on my mind, and that was terrifying. And what was this unknown thing that we were seeing? At that time, when I'm watching this, I'm not formulating this. I'm not collating the information with different information that I have in my brain and past experiences that, this could be an extraterrestrial event. I don't know. But
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains.